A faint cry drew the veteran deep into the woods during the blizzard. But what he faced was not a lost animal. 3 tiny lives were hanging from a tree branch, and this horrifying sight was only the beginning of an even more brutal truth. At 55, Arthur Miller wore the solitude of the Montana wilderness like a second skin. He was a man built of hard lines and quiet resolve, with a thick, gray-streaked beard that hid the firm set of his jaw. His eyes, a pale, weathered blue, held a distance that had nothing to do with the vast landscape around him. They were the eyes of a soldier who had left the war but never escaped its ghosts. His cabin, nestled deep in the Gallatin National Forest, was more of a fortress against memory than a home, a place where the crushing silence was preferable to the echoes of the past. He sought peace in the stillness of the mountains, a quiet he could never quite find within himself. The afternoon blizzard had descended without warning, a thick white curtain that swallowed the world. Art gripped the wheel of his old pickup truck, its engine groaning as it clawed its way up the snow-covered track toward his cabin. He had just returned from his monthly supply run, the bed of the truck loaded with essentials. It was on the final turn, less than a mile from home, that he heard it. It was not a sound of the forest, not the creak of a snow-heavy branch or the howl of the wind. It was a thin, high-pitched whimper, a desperate thread of sound almost torn apart by the storm. He stopped the truck, killing the engine. The world went quiet except for the wind, and that sound, again, clearer this time. A cry for help. Against his better judgment, Art pulled on his thick gloves and stepped out into the biting cold. He followed the sound off the track, his boots sinking deep into the snow as he pushed his way between the towering pines. His flashlight beam cut through the swirling flakes and landed on a low-hanging branch of an ancient fir tree. And then he saw it, the source of the sound. Not one creature, but 3. 3 tiny German shepherd puppies, no more than a few weeks old, dangling from thick cords tied around their middles. They weren't just abandoned. They were hung like horrifying, living ornaments, their small black and tan bodies limp, coated in a layer of freezing snow, their cries now almost too weak to be heard. Arthur froze, his breath catching in his throat as a cold fury, colder than the storm itself, settled in his heart. The initial shock solidified into a cold, hard purpose. For the first time in years, the ghosts in Art's mind fell silent, replaced by a single, crystal-clear objective. His movements became economical and sure, the muscle memory of his training taking over. Despite the rage simmering beneath the surface, he tested the branch's strength, then hoisted himself up, his boots finding purchase on the thick trunk. With the blade of his multi-tool, he carefully sawed through the first cord. The tiny body fell into his waiting arm, a shockingly light weight, colder than the snow itself. He repeated the process twice more, a grim and silent rescuer working against the storm. Gathering the 3 frozen bundles inside his jacket, he shielded them with his own body heat and trudged back to the truck, his heart hammering with a feeling he hadn't recognized in a long time. Fierce, desperate protectiveness. His cabin, once a bastion of silent solitude, was instantly transformed into a field hospital. He laid his own woolen blankets on the hearthstones, creating a makeshift nest near the growing warmth of the fire. He worked gently, wiping the frozen grime from their matted fur with a cloth dipped in warm water. He could see the raw, red grooves the cords had cut into their skin. 2 of the puppies, after a few minutes, began to tremble violently, a sign of life returning to their frozen limbs. But the third, the smallest of the litter, remained terrifyingly still. Its black and tan fur was dull, its breathing a shallow, fragile flutter he could barely detect. Its eyes were closed, and it made no sound. Darkness fell, but Art did not sleep. He sat vigil by the fire, a watchman guarding a single, flickering flame of life. He used a small dropper from his first aid kit, to gently place warm water on the puppy's lips, hoping for a reaction. The hours bled together, marked only by the crackle of logs and the almost imperceptible rise and fall of the tiny chest. For one night, the war was forgotten. The past was gone. There was only this present, this cabin, and a desperate fight for one small creature. This immediate, urgent mission was an anchor, holding him steady in the storm both outside and within. The first hint of dawn was a pale gray wash against the cabin windows. Art's shoulders ached, and a cold dread had begun to settle in his gut. The smallest puppy had not moved for hours. He leaned in, ready to accept the worst, when he felt it. A tiny, rough tongue, no bigger than a postage stamp, rasped against his knuckle. It was a flicker of movement, almost imperceptible, but to Art, it felt like a thunderclap. A moment later, a faint whimper escaped its lips. It was the sound of life stubbornly refusing to let go. A wave of relief so powerful it made him dizzy washed over the old soldier. And for the first time since he had found them, a genuine, unforced hope took root in his heart. In the days that followed, the cabin was filled with the clumsy sounds of recovery. The strongest of the three, a male with a confident air, was the first to explore beyond the blanket nest. Art watched him take charge with a quiet authority. He called him Ranger. The other male was more inquisitive, his nose twitching constantly, his intelligent eyes following every move Art made, mapping out this new territory. He was a natural scout. And the little female, the one who had fought back from the brink, the one whose first lick had reignited something in Art's own soul, could only be one thing. He named her Hope. The names felt right, anchoring them to him in a way he hadn't expected. They were his squad now. The oppressive silence Art had once cultivated was gone. It was replaced by soft whimpers, the clicking of tiny nails on the floorboards, and most surprisingly, the sound of his own voice. He spoke to them constantly, the words feeling foreign and rusty on his tongue at first. "All right, Ranger, settle down now. What have you found, Scout?" He even found himself chuckling one afternoon as Hope tried to pounce on a dust mote dancing in a sunbeam. It was a strange, unfamiliar sound. That chuckle. It was the sound of the fortress walls around his heart beginning to crumble. Not from an attack, but from a gentle, persistent nudge from three tiny souls who now depended on him for everything. A week later, Art did something he had avoided for years. He drove into town. In a cardboard box lined with a soft blanket on the passenger seat, Ranger, Scout, and Hope huddled together, watching the unfamiliar world blur past the window. The town veterinarian, Dr. Evans, was a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and hands that were both gentle and confident. She listened patiently as Art, in his clipped, matter-of-fact way, recounted the story of the rescue, leaving out his own internal struggle. She praised his quick thinking and his tender care as she examined each puppy, confirming they were on the road to a full recovery. Her professional warmth vanished, however, when she examined the faint, scarred lines that still circled their small bodies. Her expression tightened. "This method, hanging them like this," she said, her voice low and laced with anger. "It's a signature. There's a monster in these hills operating an illegal puppy mill. We've suspected it for months, but he is notoriously difficult to track. He discards the pups he deems imperfect in the cruelest ways imaginable, always far from his own property." The words struck Art with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a random act of heartless abandonment. It was a pattern, a calculated evil. A mission objective formed in his mind, sharp and clear. Suddenly, he remembered the cords, the specific, intricate knot used to secure them. It wasn't a common knot, but a variation he recognized from his service days, one used for securing specialized gear. A detail. That was the first rule of any operation. Pay attention to the details. He looked at Dr. Evans, his gaze steady and intense. I remember the knot, he said simply. Leaving the clinic with a clean bill of health for his squad and a heavy weight of purpose, Art was no longer just a man hiding from his past. The soldier inside him had awakened, not for war, but for justice. His next stop would not be his secluded cabin, but the county sheriff's office. He had a lead, and he would see this mission through to the end. Art's information about the specialized knot proved to be the missing piece of the puzzle. Within days, the sheriff's department had raided a secluded property deep in the hills, uncovering the illegal breeding operation and rescuing over 20 neglected animals. The man responsible was arrested. The local paper briefly called Art a hero, a title he immediately rejected when they called for a comment. He hadn't done it for praise. He had done it for 3 small souls who had been shown the worst of humanity and deserved to witness the best. He wanted no recognition, only the quiet peace of his newfound duty. Months passed. The snows melted, and spring arrived in the Montana mountains, painting the landscape in soft greens and wildflowers. The 3 puppies were no longer tiny, helpless bundles. They were lanky, energetic adolescents with huge paws, thick coats, and boundless curiosity. From the porch of his cabin, Art watched them play in the morning sun. Ranger, the natural leader, chased a pine cone across the yard with serious intent. Scout, ever the explorer, had his nose deep in a patch of new grass, investigating a world of fresh smells, and Hope, sleek and confident, bounded after them, her tail a triumphant flag. The hard lines around Art's eyes had softened, replaced by the gentle crinkles of a man who now smiled often. The haunted distance was gone, replaced by a warm, present gaze. He took a sip of his coffee, the air filled with the happy sounds of their play. He realized then that his true mission had not ended with the arrest of one cruel man. His most important mission began the day he brought them home. In saving them from the cold, they had pulled him from the wreckage of his own memories, grounding him firmly in the now. They had given him a new squad to care for, a new purpose to face the dawn. The cabin was no longer a fortress against the world. It was simply home. And he was no longer a soldier hiding from his past, but a man, finally and fully at peace. In rescuing another, we often truly rescue ourselves. The love of an animal can heal the deepest wounds and give us a new mission when we need it most. If this story of courage and second chances touched your heart, please share it. Subscribe to our channel to help us continue celebrating the incredible bond that saves us all.